So we're starting to go live now.
Good evening. I'm Linda Hoffman, the chair of the Tompkins County Democratic Committee. A special welcome to the candidates and our viewers who are joining the forum via live streaming. The forum this evening will be moderated by Fred Balfour. He is retired and volunteers on WFRI radio as a radio journalist. WFRI is a community radio serving Watkins Glen and Ithaca. We plan to have a very robust conversation tonight with our three candidates, and I'd like to turn the moderation over to Fred.
Thank you, Linda, and let me add my welcome to the candidates and to our viewers. We'll get started simply by asking each of the candidates in alphabetic order to simply introduce themselves, given the full name and city and county of residence. Cheney.
Jamie Cheney, Millerton, Dutchess County.
Josh Riley. Josh, you're muted. Josh,
of course I am. Josh Riley. I'm a native of Broome County and I live in Tompkins County.
And Osun Zotique.
Hello, my name is Osun Zotique. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm a longtime resident of Hudson, New York in Columbia County.
Thanks, folks. Now let's quickly review tonight's guidelines. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for closing. I'll call on each of you in alphabetic order for opening and reverse alphabetic order for closing. For the questions, I'll call on each in a random order and for a 2-minute answer. Our host, Linda Hoffman, will give a hand signal with 15 seconds remaining. At 0 seconds, she will call stop, and after a few seconds, we will ask again nicely. Note that our superb technical support staff will enter each question into the Zoom chat box for the candidates and also into the YouTube comments. So you can, for the second or third person answering random order, you can quickly review that question. And lastly, we're planning to wrap up about 8:15. Now, let's get started with opening statements in alphabetic order. Jamie Cheney, an opening statement.
Thank you. And thank you, Tompkins Dems, for finding a few minutes for us on this holiday Monday evening. And thank you to your leadership for a phenomenally well-organized meeting. The three of us were commenting. This is probably the best organized forum we've been on. So thank you. These are certainly pretty tough moments in our brand new 19th congressional district and in our nation as a whole. I don't need to tell anyone in this group about rising fuel costs or the existential dread as we think about climate change and our children's future on the planet, or the fear in your child's eyes as they describe their latest active shooter drill in school. You all know it because you've lived it. And as a working parent, a small business owner, and a mother of 3 boys, I've lived it too. I saw firsthand as a young mother the struggles that women had in the workplace. I didn't stay on the sidelines in that fray. I jumped in and I built a company around supporting working parents. This is very much how I operate. When I see existing structures that don't work, I identify solutions. I bring people together to build them. I jump in. I grew up in a family that was very much driven by this type of public service. My father, Jay Flaherty, was the deputy mayor of Philadelphia at a challenging time for the city immediately following the MOVE bombing. At our kitchen table, we talk about that doing everything possible for your community could be very hard and uncomfortable at times, but was very necessary. This is what has made me a fighter and someone who believes that no institution or tradition or law or policy is ever too big to change. So my promise to you today is this: I will fight tirelessly to protect a woman's right to choose, to protect our environment, to fight for meaningful gun reform, to fight for real access to healthcare, to make housing more affordable, and mostly to earn your vote come August. So thank you for having me this evening.
Thanks, Jamie. Josh Riley, an opening statement.
Great, thank you. It's so great to be with all of you. We have new districts, we have new candidates, but there's a lot of familiar faces in the audience, which is great. My fellow candidates, it's so good to see you. Osun, we hadn't met yet, and it's nice to meet you, and congratulations on your historic candidacy. And of course, Linda and the members of TCDC, thanks for organizing this forum. You're getting really good at it. I'm Josh Riley. I'm from Endicott, New York, where my family's been for about 100 years working in the local factories. And as I was growing up, we lost a lot of those jobs, and that's informed a lot of what I've done in my career. I got my start as an intern and then a staff assistant for Maurice Hinchey, and that was an experience that really inspired me to pursue a career in public service. I served as a policy analyst at the U.S. Department of Labor, where I worked on policies to help workers who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. I had a fellowship on Senator Ted Kennedy's Labor and Pensions Committee staff, where I fought to protect the Family Medical Leave Act out of law school. I turned down a bunch of job offers to work with banks on Wall Street, and instead I took on a landmark civil rights lawsuit representing kids from low-income families who are having trouble getting the health care they needed. I served as a law clerk on the United States Court of Appeals and then as counsel in the United States Senate, where I'm really proud of the work we did to fight for voting rights and criminal justice reform and to hold big corporations accountable. As a lawyer in private legal practice, I sued insurance companies that were raising their rates on small businesses. I sued conspiracy theorists who peddled disinformation about our elections. And during the Trump administration, I sued them over the Muslim ban. That was an issue that's near and dear to my heart because my wife's the daughter of immigrants. I believe that my deep roots in upstate New York and my proven record of public service in Congress and the courts is going to allow me to hit the ground running and take on the big challenges we're facing, both as a region and a country. And it would be a real honor and privilege for me to do it because I'm so optimistic about what we're going to accomplish together. Thanks so much for having me.
And Osun Zotique, an opening statement.
Yes, hello. I want to be remiss without acknowledging four things really briefly. Number one, acknowledging that we are living in a settler nation on Indigenous land. I want to take a moment to celebrate the federal holiday today of Juneteenth, the National LGBTQIA+ Pride Month, as we continue celebrating the historic achievements of our LGBTQIA+ neighbors and leaders. And lastly, standing on the shoulders of generations of trans women and folks who have been leaders in the community, fighting against violence, persecution, discrimination, tooth and nail, to get people such as myself to the point that we have had the opportunity to get to. Thank you so much, everybody, Tompkins County Democrats, all of our online watchers, and it's a huge honor to meet all the candidates, my fellow candidates tonight. And as a first-generation Cuban-American yoga teacher, PhD candidate in education, New York State certified educator and executive director of the Regional Pride Organization of the Hudson Valley. I know that all of my intersecting identities and all of my intellectual curiosities lend a really unique lenses, all where I can empathize, provide visibility, representation, both with my own personal acumen and skill and background, which we can get into later, and also with the very nature of who I am and the intersecting identities that I've struggled and cultivated to bring to light. And so as someone who's neither man nor woman, I know moving forward that I embody the unity that our country is and that our country deserves.
And that completes our opening statements. Thanks. A note on the questions for tonight. The committee members were asked to submit questions, and in some cases, the questions were consolidated. Similar questions were consolidated into one, or a question was reworded for brevity or clarity. Let's move to our first question, and we will be asking for answers in randomized order. Question one is on district-wide issues. The redrawn 19th Congressional District extends from the Hudson Valley to the Southern Tier. What are the most important issues facing our district, and how do these vary across the region? Josh Riley, your response?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. This is a a district that, as you mentioned, stretches far and wide, and each community has their own unique needs and local demands. For example, I was out in Walton a few weeks ago, and there's some real significant infrastructure issues that they're facing. In my hometown of Endicott, we're trying to develop a new battery manufacturing facility. So there's issues unique to each community, but one overarching issue that touches everybody in this district and frankly the entire country is the fact that our democracy is on the brink. It is imperiled. If you've been following the January 6th hearings, you have seen that our democracy has become dominated in certain respects by conspiracy theorists and folks who are peddling disinformation for the sole purpose of tearing us apart at the very moment when we most need to come together to meet these challenges. We have a campaign finance system that is an absolute cesspool. We have dark money, we have special interests, we have corporate PACs flooding our elections, buying politicians and sending them to Washington to do their bidding instead of working for working folks back home. If we don't take guard and strengthen and protect our democracy, we won't be able to solve all of the other pressing challenges we are facing in this country, whether that's building out a new water treatment facility in Walton, whether it's bringing home the federal funds we need to start the manufacturing process in a place like Endicott, whether it's addressing Roe v. Wade, which is really on the brink, whether it's addressing climate change, whether it's raising the minimum wage, whether it's helping out our farmers who are struggling to get by. How can we address any of those big problems and big challenges if we can't even have a peaceful transition of power in this country? So every day we need to be mindful of the steps we need to take to protect our democracy and also to strengthen it.
Thanks. And Jamie Cheney, the response?
I think that Josh just made some phenomenal points, and I agree that the existential threat to our democracy, the lost trust in government that has gotten us there, the terrifying threats to rights that I think that all three of us as candidates grew up thinking we would never look back on are truly terrifying. What has struck me as I've traveled this district is that people want to be concerned about these things, but the issue that is simply sitting in front of them is thinking about how they're going to feed their family tomorrow or next week or next month. And I've had a lot of conversations where people say, I'd like to vote based on protection of choice, but I need to make my first vote about who's going to affect gas prices. And I think we need to be hyperly conscious that the pressure on wallets in our district right now and across this country is unprecedented. And we can make macroeconomics all we want, but until we show a commitment to recognizing that and providing short to medium term relief and acknowledging the stress that puts on families, we're going to only feed into the loss of trust in government if we don't talk about these things simultaneously. One thing, I was in Lawrence in Otsego this past week, and I heard about the last in-home daycare in town closing down, and a family that made a decision as to whether to travel to a daycare in another town, and the gas cost that came with that, as well as the more expensive daycare, and whether that meant that a parent gave up a job or whether they pulled the child out of daycare. What was the decision there? That's incredibly hard for a family. I've heard about costs of flood insurance, which are going up for families who can least afford it. Obviously, food costs are a huge concern. So I see the issues that are facing our nation in tandem with the issues that are facing people's wallets.
Thanks, Jamie. And Osun Zotique, the response.
Chaotic times call for transformative leadership without question. And at the same time, I personally am not consumed with fear or terrified feelings, because I know that the Hudson Valley and Southern Tier of New York contain some of the most famous institutions of higher learning in the history of this country. We live in one of the wealthiest and most prosperous states, in one of the wealthiest and most prosperous countries in the history of civilization. There's absolutely no reason that a hardworking family in this region should be without access to decent, affordable housing, functioning healthcare, and all of the existing benefits that are available to them under the current statute should be fully made available. I love this region all the way from Coquecton all the way to Kinderhook. I've traveled all around, and I've spoken with people who are crying in CVS parking lots because they're being upsold by their insurance companies for hospice care for their loved ones. It's just not acceptable to me that so much of this district is covered by the Rural Housing Development Act of 1949, and voters are eligible for zero down mortgages and income-based rentals, and that we're not staffed enough to administer these programs, direct programs fully. I'm heartbroken that 38% of people without access to broadband internet might not be able to log on to healthcare.gov and take access of all of the existing benefits that are basic quality of life things that are fully afforded to them under, again, existing statute without even changing the law by a single word. There are some differences, but I think across this district far and wide, we have more in common than we have difference.
Thanks, Osun. Now for question 2 on campaign strategy. What is your strategy for campaigning in this new district, bringing the different regions together and winning the general election? Jamie, your response?
Absolutely, and it is a very good question in a new district that is larger than the state of Massachusetts. So campaign strategy, a few critical things. We, as of this morning, have moved some of our senior team members to Ithaca. We firmly believe you need to be based at either end of the district to be meaningfully present and be having the conversations to learn about what people are truly concerned about and how we can best help our communities on a regular basis. So our strategy is to have teams on both sides of the district so we can be as present as possible. In terms of winning the general election, unfortunately, this is now, I believe, our Republican plus 0.8 district. You cannot win this election on Democratic turnout. We must get crossover votes. We need to connect with people on their day-to-day issues, not only on the larger issues that we want them to care about. We need to connect with people in our rural towns, not just on the two blue ends of the district. We need a candidate who comes from those communities, who has worked in those communities, who has built businesses in those communities. We also need to make sure, and I know that every single one of us will do this, we need to present as stark of a contrast to our GOP opponent as possible. We need to make crystal clear his atrocious voting record on things like gay marriage and voting against unshackling women giving birth in prison. And we need to do that by presenting a candidate who can connect with women across both parties. And I've very much heard that women across both parties are terrified about choice in this moment, but terrified, unfortunately, and realistically behind the pressures that their families are feeling. So we need to make sure we present a candidate who truly can build that bipartisan coalition with credibility in the very red middle of this district, and who presents a stark contrast to Mark Lehner.
Thanks, Jamie. Osun, the response to campaign strategy.
Well, one definite benefit of living on the eastern side of the Hudson River is that I'm only about 45 minutes from the state capitol in Albany. And this connection with the state capitol is one opportunity where we have the ability to stay connected with the leadership structure at that level, and also to continue working to see where New York State is providing leadership in gun safety, the SAFE Act, in the Gender Recognition Act, and taking the opportunity to bring that down to Washington to really push for progress at a national level. And as we turn westward towards reaching out to these wonderful communities that we have the opportunity to also represent, I think that what we can do is continue leveraging the power of the internet, much as it was 100 years ago with rural electrification. We do have the ability to reach people in their homes, and as we're doing now on Zoom, in new and ever-changing ways. So apart from being together in person with voters and meeting them, we can really leverage technology. And again, by showing the voters and the communities who we are, showing them that we're not like the way of the past, and showing that what it means to be a leader rather than a politician. There's absolutely no reason that a leader with a progressive platform could not photo negative do the reverse of what Trump accomplished in 2016. And so I think that providing inspiring leadership from unexpected places would help motivate unlikely voters, second homeowners from New York City, and people who have not even registered to vote, such as many of the people who I've been speaking with in the community are not even registered voters, and they're registering in droves. So I think that's what needs to happen to embody and showcase that change.
Thanks, Osun. And Josh, your response to question 2 on campaign strategy.
Thanks. I think you win political campaigns the same way you represent folks and hold office. And the number one thing you can do, the number one job, the most important thing, the most important determinant of your success in the office and in the campaign is, are you showing up and are you listening, particularly to folks who are inclined to disagree with you, particularly in this environment. And so we've been in all 11 counties, most of them multiple times, showing up in the community, listening to folks, understanding their concerns, taking that homework home, figuring out how we can get Washington to work for working folks in this district, and having those conversations, including with, and probably most importantly, with people who are inclined to disagree with us. I think Jamie's right that we need to draw some contrast with Mark Molinaro, and I'm able to draw some contrasts with him that I think are incredibly significant. Number one, I was born in this district, I was raised in this district, and I live in this district. Mark Molinaro can't say any of those things. He can't. So that's a contrast between him and me. Mark Molinaro is swimming in special interest money and corporate PAC money. I have never taken a penny of corporate PAC money, and I never will. That's a really significant contrast between Mark Molinaro and me. And it's a contrast that I draw as a matter of principle, not a matter of political convenience. I have a bipartisan record of bringing Democrats and Republicans together to get things done. You know, I worked in Washington at a time when it was incredibly divided. And even in that environment, I was able to bring together very conservative Republicans with very progressive Democrats to get deals done and get laws passed. And it's a lesson for me that we have more in common than what divides us. And it's exactly the type of record I think we're going to need to demonstrate to win in November. I'll yield back the rest of my time as I see it's almost expired.
Thanks, Josh. And now on to question 3 on racial justice. What have you already done and will you do to include the perspectives of people of diversity or BIPOC in your decision-making processes and your work as a legislator? Osun Zotique, the response?
I think that one of the first, there's so many ways to include the BIPOC experience and the incredibly important work of racial justice, which is far from over in our community and in this country. So it's so important to take this particular issue with enormous respect and enormous seriousness. Apart from embodying that diversity in every single cell of my body, one thing that I can also do is my entire team of staffers is comprised of LGBTQIA plus individuals of various ethnic backgrounds. And so basically recruiting and attracting diverse teams of people working with us, and furthermore, working to get BIPOC leadership also elected is something that we can continue to do as a community, as a party, and really prioritizing that work of listening. In fact, when Juneteenth was recognized as a holiday, I was just listening to some remarks about this, where it wasn't, if I recall correctly, a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation itself. It was a celebration that people heard about the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a holiday about listening. And so I take that very deeply to heart. As a first-generation Cuban American of mixed ancestry, I know it to be true that the work is about listening, and I will equally be listening to my BIPOC neighbors. I will be listening to my LGBTQIA plus neighbors, and I will just as attentively be present as a neighbor and as a leader with my Caucasian neighbors, all of my neighbors as well. So I think it's about listening and about representing what we are experiencing as healers and leaders.
Thanks, Osun. And Jamie Cheney, your response on racial justice.
Absolutely. I founded a company that was built on making the workforce work for working parents. And in the spring of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement swept our country, we got a lot of calls asking us to, well, can you be our diversity consultant as well? Can you help us retain people of color? And you know what? We said no. Because I'm not in a place where I can tell a community to come to a table or be part of a conversation. We need to make sure that this is part of a naturally evolving conversation. And I said, go and find someone who is part of this community and wants to come and work for your company. That's how we've run our campaign. When I launched my first state Senate race 1 year ago, several people came to me and applied to be a campaign manager. And one was a woman of color who proactively sought out our campaign and articulated why she wanted to work with us. So our campaign is led by a woman of color. I also believe strongly that we should not hire campaign staffers from New York City or Washington, D.C. and drop them into our communities and tell them to go out and build coalitions. We should make sure that our campaign has the credibility to have organizers arise from our communities who say, I'm part of this community and I want to work with you. My work in the Hudson Valley has been deeply, deeply rooted in that. We have had organizers step up. We've started to have the same from the communities of color in this district. And that's how I believe we should be addressing racial justice, by giving people opportunities to come to the table and to grow while they're at the table, and to create opportunity, not by any kind of nominal inclusion.
Thanks, Jamie. And now, Josh Riley, your response to the question on racial justice.
Thanks. It was such a privilege to attend Juneteenth celebrations in the community yesterday, and I found it to be incredibly inspiring and a reminder. I think there is a lot to celebrate in terms of how far we have come in this country, but it's also a pretty stark reminder of how much we have left to do to achieve true equality and full justice for everybody. So it's an incredibly important day, and the celebrations around the community were very moving. I have a record on these issues. My first case out of law school, I did civil rights work representing kids from low-income families, many families from all walks of life and all backgrounds, helping them get access to Medicaid services and the healthcare services they needed. When the Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court, a decision that very clearly had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, I worked on legislation to restore the Voting Rights Act and to rebuild the preclearance requirements that would allow the Justice Department to look at changes to voting laws to make sure that they didn't have discriminatory intent or discriminatory impact. I've worked on criminal justice reform. Our criminal justice system for far too long has disproportionately harmed communities of color. And so one of the things I worked on was sentencing reform to make sure that we didn't have mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent offenses that were being used to essentially make war on communities of color. With respect to our campaign, we've hired a diverse team. We have a team of paid staff and also consultants, and we have made a decision to make sure we have a diverse team. That's the right thing to do. It also allows us to make much better decisions when you have a diversity of backgrounds and viewpoints. And so we've been committed to that, and I'm proud of the work we've done on it.
Thanks, Josh. Now, question 4 on healthcare. What do you see as the top 3 healthcare issues that you'd like to address as our representative? For your number 1 issue, what are the barriers to realizing it, and how do you plan to overcome them? Jamie, your response on healthcare.
This is a very good question, and it's very, very real in NY-19. So the top 3 barriers that I see are cost, proximity, and transport. So as I've traveled New York 19, I think like everywhere in this country, healthcare is prohibitively expensive to get everything you need. And I truly believe that healthcare is not just medical care, but includes vision and hearing and dental and other things that are crushing our families' budgets today. In the 19th specifically, what I'm hearing is a combination of proximity. So great, I could get a doctor's appointment, but it's 2 hours away and I can't take time off of work and the fuel cost, and then availability. So great, I could get a doctor's appointment. It's 6 months out. And this is happening to me today. I think that we need to focus on, we need to steer the national conversation on healthcare. It needs to exist in our urban centers, and then it needs to consider the experience here. So in our urban centers, I think we're hearing some really good policy ideas, and I agree with them. I think that it's a priority to bring the Medicare cutoff age down to age 60. I think it's a priority to give Medicare the ability to negotiate over prescription drug prices and to funnel those savings right into that vision and hearing and dental coverage that I mentioned. However, that's not enough in New York 19, because if the services are available, but they're 2 hours away, and we have families who count on working 2, sometimes 3 shifts a day to make ends meet, what are we doing to make real change that they're going to feel next week? We need to consider proximity and access in our smaller cities and rural areas.
Thanks, Jamie. And Josh, your response on healthcare.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'd say they're the 3 biggest issues, but 3 of the issues that I've at least heard in just about every conversation. Number 1, access to healthcare in rural communities. Number 2, the mental health crisis that we're facing in this country, particularly after COVID. And number 3, Roe v. Wade and women's health and protecting women's reproductive rights. With respect to rural health issues, there are some very specific things that we need to be looking at in the next Congress, the 118th Congress. So the Farm Bill is going to come through Congress in the next session. There's a title in that deals with community building, health issues. One of the things that I'm going to work on is making sure that the Farm Bill includes provisions that allow greater use of telemedicine. Telemedicine is critically important and valuable, especially for monitoring chronic health conditions. And if the nearest hospital or the nearest facility is a long way away, but you can get access to telemedicine, it's great. With that, however, and of course, we need to build out our broadband infrastructure. Telemedicine is useless if you don't have reliable broadband. So what we need to do in the next Congress is use the Farm Bill as a vehicle to get some of the policy changes we need. There's some really good bipartisan legislation to change reimbursement rates and incentives around providing telemedicine. And we need to do that in conjunction with implementing the infrastructure law's $65 billion fund, so that we have both the policy that allows people access to telemedicine, but also the infrastructure to do it. With respect to mental health issues, one of the things we really need to do is get more mental health counselors into our schools. Right now, the ratio of mental health counselors to students is about 3 or 4 or 5 times the recommended average in this district. And so there are provisions that we could use. The Nurses Act is a great example that would allow us to get more mental health support into schools. Finally, Roe v. Wade, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit later, but we can't talk about health issues without talking about that.
Thanks, Josh. And Osun, the response on healthcare.
Yeah, first of all, really commendable ideas that I've had the opportunity to listen to so far, really appreciating all of those policy details. And also in the progressive democratic sphere, these conversations of Medicare for all, I mean, I'm very, very interested in all these conversations. However, as a candidate, I think I would just take a step back as well and discuss the things that I'm most passionate about when I look at District 19. I think that we all deserve to live with wellness and integrity in our bodies. I don't think that we need to be having sick care, or that we need to be propping up for-profit corporations and businesses that thrive on our consumption. So I'm really interested in studying the Essential Plan, which I think is severely underutilized in upstate New York, and looking at ways to nationalize that. I'm really interested in access. As we said, broadband access is such a problem. One thing that I've witnessed is people struggling to, again, get on healthcare.gov. or the New York State marketplace. So perhaps every municipal building needs a device enabled with that portal on it. What a simple idea that every single citizen and every single resident could take care of, could take advantage of. And then when I think about reaching across the aisle to collaborate with our colleagues in Washington, I imagine that we could even negotiate the healthcare savings account and that entire ball of wax to increase, maybe even double contribution limits to NHSA as yet another strategy for expanding upon and maximizing what we have under existing statute to help transform our access to healthcare from one of sick care to optimal wellness, which is something that we deserve to hold as a vision for this community.
Thanks, Osun. And on to question 5, which is on inflation and the economy. Rising inflation means short-term pain at the gas station or grocery store and long-term pain from higher mortgage rates. How would you reassure voters about inflation and assist the most vulnerable in our economy? Josh Riley, your response?
Yeah, this is a question I get everywhere because a lot of families are sitting down at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to balance the budget and pay the bills. I remember growing up and my parents used to put my school clothes, my sister's school clothes on layaway at Kmart. And I remember those conversations every week, making sure there was enough money to go make the payment so that my sister and I would have our school clothes in time for the first day of school. These are real conversations that a lot of families have been having around a lot of kitchen tables across upstate New York, especially recently. My plan has 2 components to it. First is short-term immediate relief, things we can do to provide immediate help to working families. Number 1, we should lower the cost of prescription drugs. About 50% of folks over 50 in New York State are having to choose between their medicine and their groceries. That's not acceptable. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to do that. We should expand Medicare to cover hearing and vision and dental. Those are very costly services that should be covered by Medicare. We should reinstate the child tax credit. That's $300 a month in the pockets of working families who need it most. How do you pay for it? Well, you close the carried interest loophole, which does nothing but to benefit hedge fund managers and investment bankers on Wall Street. We can close loopholes that allow corporations to ship jobs overseas. Let's start investing in working folks instead of big corporations. The second component to my anti-inflation plan is longer term. What we are seeing today with inflation is a direct consequence of disastrous trade deals that both Democrats and Republicans are responsible for, that have shipped thousands and thousands of really good paying jobs overseas and have put our supply chains halfway around the world. We're seeing the consequences of that with shipping issues and bottlenecks. We need to start making stuff again here in upstate New York. We need to start making the things that we're going to need in the future here so that we're not contending with these same inflation problems later on.
Thanks, Josh. Osun, the response on inflation and the economy?
I am so incredibly tired of Republican folks on Twitter, including Mr. Molinaro, continuing to complain that this is Biden's inflation or that it's our inflation. It most certainly isn't, just as Josh outlined for us. It's definitely present on every single level that there's pain at the pump and that costs are going up. There are people around me who are changing all of their holiday plans and their even weekly plans and commutes because they need to factor in the price of gas. They can't even drive over to see their loved ones as frequently or commute to the same job. It is really reaching a breaking point, and we absolutely need to take all relevant measures to address that. There's an affordable housing crisis in the city of Hudson, which affects even myself searching for a new place. It's completely out of my budget. It's completely out of my friends' budgets to find a decent roof over our heads. So we absolutely need to do something in the short term. That being said, I'm really interested in several other experiments and things that we could investigate more on to help rebuild the American economy as we move forward from COVID-19, including researching and expanding the Hudson-based Universal Basic Income Project, revising and scrutinizing the Trump 2017 opportunity zones, which were not overseen well at all. And again, reaching across the aisle, we could actually double the Trump policy of allowing funds from 529 plans to pay off student debt. In addition to forgiving student debt, obviously, we could double that limit to 20,000 for folks. Taking all measures in a longer term, that would be very high leverage and very bipartisan. And also these bigger picture things like expanding the Consumer Protection Bureau and taking all of these measures so that this never happens again, because it's intolerable.
Thanks, Osun. And Jamie Cheney, your response on inflation and the economy.
Yeah. Again, it's a macroeconomic issue, but that does not affect people when they're thinking about what tomorrow or next week or next month looks like. I think that there's some immediate things that I would do. So the first is passing the consumer fuel price gouging bill. And then the second is to increase access to our strategic petroleum reserve. We've got to get those gas prices down, not just in terms of transport costs, but in how they're in real time being passed on into costs and other things that, sorry, people just can't find a way to decrease in their budget. We need people to be able to fuel their families, and here in upstate New York, unfortunately, automobile transportation is how we get around. Josh also alluded to a few other things that I touched on before that I think are real levers on people's wallets right now. So it's giving Medicare the ability to negotiate on drug prices and using that savings to address vision, hearing, and dental, other things that we know are levers on people's wallets. And he also touched on the care tax credit. I feel very strongly it's something you'll across every policy topic that I touch on. Few things that are designed to help working families should be done through tax credits versus through grant funding. What was amazing about how the child care tax credit was executed in 2021 was that it went into families' pockets on a monthly basis. We need to go back to that. We need to put cash in families' pockets now. On a long-term basis, I think there's two things we need to do. One, we need to look at bringing jobs back to the US. And as Josh alluded to, we made a lot of great points making things regionally. We also need to shore up our regional food supply. When you grow something somewhere else and you need to drive it here, it is subject to gas prices. We have an amazing potential for a food supply across New York State, but we need to think about everything from our slaughterhouse availability, which is very real in terms of affecting the price of meat, to how we're getting things to those markets and how we're supporting our smaller farmers.
Thanks, Jamie. Now we move on to question 6, which is on crime. What do you believe are the top criminal justice issues facing our district, and how will you contribute to solving them? Osun, the response?
Yes, so I actually, unfortunately, was part of a crime recently while I was campaigning. Somebody was very upset, and they yelled at me. They told me I needed to stop what I was doing, and they really screamed and then drove off and got arrested, it turns out, for a attempted murder in Hudson, New York. And as unfortunate as that is, I think that it's with great care that we need to continue addressing the mental health aspect of the criminal justice system, as well as restorative justice. What does it look like for a human being to go through the correctional process and then to exit from being on the inside, as it's called, and reintegrating into the outer world? And I think that there is such disregard for the basic human subjectivity and dignity, honestly, of our inmates. When you look at policies, as Jamie alluded, regarding the restraint policies, and when you look at these other issues of this really aggressive policing, there's so much work and so much opportunity to train our penal and law enforcement professionals how to execute their duty with greater compassion, sensitivity, involvement in the community. I've been through so many towns around the Hudson Valley and west of here where our local service members are appreciated and revered, and there's so much respect, but we really need to just completely redesign the process of how people who make illegal choices are treated, and how can we restore order and balance and restore integrity back in the community.
Thanks, Ocean. And Josh, your response on question 6 on crime.
Thank you. I come at this sort of personally. My mother just retired as a probation officer in Tioga County, where she served that community for years. My cousin is a corrections officer in Broome County. Our folks in law enforcement put their lives on the line every day to serve and protect our community, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude for that. One of the biggest challenges is Ocean was right when they said that the mental health issue and the intersection between the mental health system and the criminal justice system is a huge challenge that we need to address. So when I was working as counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I was hearing both from law enforcement officials and also advocates in the community that because our mental health system is so badly underfunded, a lot of folks in crisis end up not getting the care that they need, not getting the services they need. And then their first encounter with anybody is with law enforcement because of a 911 call. That's really bad for folks in crisis. The National Alliance on Mental Illness says folks in crisis deserve help, not handcuffs. And I believe that is really, really true. But the system as we have designed it doesn't operate that way. So when people in mental health crisis are interacting with the criminal justice system, it's bad for folks in crisis. It's bad for law enforcement officials who have to do those responses. And it's really bad for the taxpayer, because one of the least efficient things you can do is take somebody who's having a crisis and lock them up when what they really need is help. And so one of the things I worked on when I was in the Senate that I'm really proud of is a bill called the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Act. It's actually up for reauthorization next year. What we did was we brought very conservative Republicans together with very progressive Democrats, and we stood up a new program and a funding stream that created mental health services that were run in conjunction with the criminal justice system, so that if somebody came into the criminal justice system with an unmet mental health need, there'd be a bed or a facility or service for them. We need to reauthorize that and have more of it.
Thanks, Josh. And Jamie, your response on crime.
I have to say the fact that all three of us are going to focus significantly on mental health in this question tells you where the crisis is in this country. So I'm going to layer on, I think, mental health, but I also think we need to look at mental health from the bottom up, if you will. I have 3 sons. My youngest is 8, and since I launched my congressional race, I've driven him to school one day. And on the way to school, it was the day after Texas, he said to me, "Mommy, if the shooter comes to my classroom, should I hide in the bathroom or should I try to climb out the window?" What we are doing to the mental health of our children does not allow them to grow up to be healthy adults. So not only do we need to be proactive on mental health when people are interacting with the criminal justice system, but we need to be thinking about the holistic mental health picture that starts with our children's experiences in school that involves conversations about guns. So this means hard gun legislation now, everywhere from, and I know the 3 of us agree on this, a ban on assault weapons, background checks, but also, looking hard at things like ghost guns and things that are affecting some of our inner cities. The other place that I think it's important to touch on here is the resources that we're giving to mental health within the system. I'm going to share this with all of you here. And as we all know, I live right on the edge of Dutchess County and back up into Columbia County. So I live in Mark Molinaro's territory, and our police chief has been asking him for 3 funded social workers to arrive on calls alongside his officers for 2 years, and Mark has been delaying the request. So we need to get involved on a federal and a state level and every other level to let people like Mark Molinaro, who think it's fun to play a political game on something like this, and tell them it's not okay. Because these are our children and these are our communities, and this is not okay.
Thanks, Jamie. Now we move on to question 7 on political polarization. Political polarization in America is very high, and the list of issues is long. Abortion, guns, transgender rights, COVID measures, all that. Choose a polarizing issue and, giving some examples, talk about how you would navigate the divisions you will face among your constituents and your colleagues in Washington. Josh Riley, your response on political polarization.
Yeah, you're not going to like this, and this might be the lawyer in me, but I'm just going to dispute the premise of the question. I think the question actually gets it wrong in the sense that you're asking us to focus on the most polarizing things and talk about that. What I want to do when I go to Washington and what I want to talk about is all of the places where there's actually areas of agreement between folks, because we are right now just being torn apart at the seams by extremists and debates around some of the most polarizing issues. And on those, like, look, we need to stand up and fight really hard for our principles. So when it comes to something like Roe v. Wade and protecting a woman's right to choose, there's not a compromise to be had on that. That is a fight we are going to fight. When it comes to things like protecting our kids in schools, there's not a compromise to be had on that. We're going to fight that fight. But it's also simultaneously true that there are so many problems and so many challenges this country is facing where there's a lot of room for bipartisan agreement and there's a whole lot of common ground. One example that I like to talk about from my time working in the US Senate was a situation where advocates who ran battered women's shelters were coming to my office and saying, look, we're getting a lot of folks who are survivors of domestic violence coming into the shelters. And what was happening is survivors were calling to enforce temporary restraining orders. The police would come. And then the next day, the landlord would say, look, I can't have the sirens and the disturbances. You have to go. What I just told you, that is not a partisan issue. That's not a polarizing issue. That's not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It's an issue about protecting folks who are vulnerable and in need. And so even at a time when Congress was hopelessly divided and everybody was focused on the big blow up issues, we were able to bring Democrats and Republicans together to write a law that basically said, if you're a housing system and you're getting federal money, you cannot evict somebody just because they're a survivor of domestic violence. And we brought Democrats and Republicans together to do that and get that signed into law. And so I think we need to focus a lot on the areas where we have common ground and start working together on those.
Thanks, Josh. And next, Jamie Cheney on question 7, political polarization.
I share, and I want to share Josh's premise that we do share more in common, and I'm going to truly believe that, because we need to move forward from there. For my sample issue, let's take a route. I'm a 4-H mom, and I have a network of 4-H moms across the state. For those who don't know, this is Youth Livestock Showing World, and I do feel it gives me a real-time focus group, because I will tell you that very few of them are on Democratic county committee calls anywhere in this state tonight among my fellow 4-H moms. And I was with the 4-H moms the week after the Roe, the leak came out. And I said to them, as we're standing on the sidelines of a livestock show, like, guys, like, don't you care about this? Doesn't it upset you? What they all said is, actually, I believe everyone should have a right to choose. But it's kind of like number 11 or 12 on my list of things I feel really strongly about right now. And this is where I think we as Democrats have progress to make. We can't tell people it needs to be number 1 and tell them to brush the other issues under the rug. And so then, of course, I said, what are the other issues? And the ones that popped up in various combinations were these. The wall that I keep talking about. If people can't figure out how they're going to feed their family tomorrow and next week, they feel like it's a luxury to think about choice. So we need to have a hard conversation about the fact that fuel prices are high, that milk prices are going up, that it costs money to drive the 2 hours to the doctor. We can't say Roe is more important than those things. The other one is guns. I'm going to be very open that this is what comes up. We haven't gotten gun legislation through because the NRA is awful. We can have a whole Zoom on that later, but also because we've pushed gun owners away from the table. I am very open that I'm a gun owner. We have a gun on our farm. We put a single bullet in it. We use it when a calf is born deformed or a predator is in the barn. We need to, in the same breath, say, we're going to protect the fact that you may be in a situation where a gun is a part of your culture or something you use as a tool. We ban assault weapons. In vilifying everyone and pushing them away from the table, we've not been able to have a conversation.
Thanks, Jamie. And Osun, the response on question 7, political polarization.
Yeah. So when I reached out to Marcus Molinaro to schedule a bowling match with him, one of the things we got to talk about was how unfortunate it is that there's such a polarity and polarization between this identity of being a Democrat or being a Republican. And I won't speak for somebody who's not here, so I'll continue to speak from my own point of view now. But for me, as a certified neurolinguistic programming coach, I know that mindsets are extremely powerful, and that by framing various difficult topics in different ways, I found a lot of traction. For instance, speaking with my neighbors that are Republican women about negative rights versus positive rights. They are not comfortable thinking about abortions happening. However, in my platform, and I'm obviously wearing my Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissent collar every day until reproductive justice is the settled law of this land, by the way, I noticed that I got a lot further when I talked in terms of there's no way that the government has a role telling us what to do with our uteruses. That focus got me a lot further than saying we need to protect abortion. I don't think there's any question in this room what needs to happen. But I found that shifting our mindset and beginning to use language in different ways while staying obviously focused on our mindset or on our values can go a long way. And there's proof. When marriage equality became a settled law in the city of New York and the state of New York, Republicans supported that, including Mayor Bloomberg and others, because it was a negative right. The government had no business telling me the gender of my spouse. There was no need to endorse same-sex union or opposite-sex union. The government had no business in that zone.
Thanks, Osun. We move on to question 8 on environment. Many voters view climate change as an existential threat. Our new, largely rural district includes over 1 million acres of farmland. Farming is dependent on fossil fuels that contribute to this problem. Given that dependence, how do we make a meaningful shift to renewable energy resources? Jamie, your response on the environment.
So this is an incredibly personal answer. I run one of those farms that uses an awful lot of fossil fuels. And we do run it. We use all regenerative farming practices. We were very proud of the fact that everything was highly local, that our cows traveled 5 minutes down the road to a processing facility and then 5 minutes to market. To us, that was a way to keep our impact small and feed our local community. And then the USDA came down with regulations that handled big processing facilities out west the same way the family-owned processing facility that was the only one left in the Hudson Valley down the street from us. They had the same level of regulation. And the processing facility closed. And all of a sudden, we are personally driving those animals 3 hours up into the Catskills. And when I make the up point, because it uses a lot more fuel. So first of all, things like regulation, we need to think about where they're appropriate. These specific USDA regulations don't have the impact because they had to do with germs shared on a kill floor. I'm sorry to use these hard words. They're not appropriate. They put a family business out of business. And then after that, they put a number of family farms out of businesses because not everyone has the capital to spend the money on diesel fuel to go 3 hours up into the Catskills with 10,000 pounds of animal behind them. It's these decisions that have put our farmers, again, in a feeling in a vilified place as they desperately try to be part of our local food supply. Truly, truly local food supply is the lowest impact possible. There is the use of diesel fuels in our farm equipment. I think that every farmer in New York State would love to buy an electric tractor. And every farmer in New York State is just thrilled when we're offered a tax credit to do that. However, most of our family farms are fully tax abated. This shows that that legislation is not written with a farmer at the table who understands that any meaningful climate regulations that are put on our farms need to be done with grant funding and not tax abatements for a sector that is no longer in our smaller family farms taxed at all. This regulation and this legislation is written for large agricultural interests, and that's not what we have in this district.
Thanks, Jamie. And Osun, the response on environment?
So man-made, or maybe I should say person-made, environmental destruction is not just viewed as an existential threat, it is an existential threat. In a country where Donald Trump is approving uranium mining in the national treasure of the Grand Canyon, and several upstate towns are still dealing with poisoned water with PFOA and other toxins, like we saw in Hoosick Falls and in Newburgh, it's unacceptable that our families and kids are subject to the violence and environmental racism, let's also add, that comes along with air, water, soil that is poisonous. In the indigenous philosophy, Native American philosophies, there are often concepts of 7 generations. And we need to model, provide visible leadership, and show that we are going to lead by example, and to demonstrate ways that we are going to improve quality of life for individuals, for families, for schools. And that needs to include massive educational shifts that involve sort of messaging and showing the community how their day-to-day quality of life is impacted. Because ultimately, I believe in the power of the people of this community. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I want our children and families to dream a more beautiful and a more clean and a more pristine environment for them to enjoy. And that's what it's about. It's not about, and of course, we are going to support our industries and in various policy decisions, but it's not about that. The framework is Main Street. It's not K Street.
Thanks, Osun. And Josh, your response on question 8 on environment.
Thank you. So I'm going to agree fully with the premise of this one. Climate change is a huge threat. It's an existential threat. As the father of a 2-year-old, it's something I think about pretty much every day. So there's 3 points I want to make. Number one, we cannot talk about the environment and climate without talking about jobs. And this is one of the things that I am so excited about. And it's one of the big things, frankly, that got me to run for Congress. We're at a precipice, we're at an inflection point here in upstate New York, where we have so many amazing and exciting opportunities to create the jobs of the future in upstate New York, addressing climate change. And what it's going to take is the entrepreneurial and innovative spirit of folks on the ground here, the brilliance and the research and development out of the SUNY system, and a really good mix of federal policies and investment strategies. So one very specific example we've seen out of the SUNY system, some cutting edge, state-of-the-art clean energy storage technologies. With a little bit of a push and a nudge and some help from Congress, we can commercialize that and start making those products here. It's about 8,000 to 10,000 really good jobs. There's a provision, I think it's section 4027 in the infrastructure bill that allocated $3.1 billion for exactly that type of activity. We should be doing that here in upstate New York. And I'm so excited about getting to Washington and doing that work. Number two, there's a huge Supreme Court decision that's about to come down either this week or next week. It's called West Virginia versus EPA. It's a challenge that was brought by Republican attorneys general, basically to gut the EPA's authority to regulate really anything in the environment. So in Congress, one of the things we're going to need to do is rewrite parts of the Administrative Procedures Act and the National Environmental Statutes if that's struck down. The last piece of this, there's a ton of stuff to talk about around the Farm Bill, policies that we could add there, anything from more support for our land grant universities to higher reimbursements for cover crops, tons of environmental opportunities there as well.
Thanks, Josh. And now, question 9, which is the last question before closing statements. This is a question on personal reflection. If you could seek counsel from any BIPOC or LGBTQ political figure in history, past or present, who would you pick and why, and what would you ask them? Osun Zotique, the response.
Well, it's a really fantastic question. And I would say that I would have to consult with Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, because 53 years ago, almost to the day, they led the Stonewall Uprising. And I would ask them, how did they learn to become so fearless in the face of great peril? Because that is the level of courage that it takes to run a campaign in public for federal office as an openly transgender person, even in 2022. And that is what it's going to take to provide the leadership that we need in Washington. It's what we're going to need in order to shift the discourse and the consciousness of the United States Congress as one of the most, if not the most unpopular bodies in terms of approval rating. And I know that Marcia and Sylvia are up there watching. And so I hope that they're sending us positive vibes. But yes, I think that I reached back to them. And as I said before, really embodying who they were and the deep wells of personal tribulation that they overcame and public self-acceptance that they modeled in their very way of being, the way that they chose to dress, the way they chose to interact. They practically invited violence and to be enacted on them, and they were completely nonviolent. And they smiled and they danced and they expressed joy and they brought the community together. And to me, that is what being queer is all about.
Thanks, Osun. Jamie Cheney, your response on personal reflection.
So I would say Tammy Duckworth. I think that she has truly been a champion for working families, for civil rights, for environmental justice, and then particularly for our veterans and military families. And I bring up the senator because as the daughter of a veteran, I think I've always thought that her work on veterans and military families has been incredible. But I also bring it up in this context because it's truly been bipartisan. And bringing people with different views, bringing people at New York 19 to win this district, we will need to bring people together from different parties. Senator Duckworth has done that. She has found common ground to do better things for our working families, for our environment, for our veterans. And I think she's an incredible example of that. And I learned from her from a distance, and I would love the opportunity to sit with her and have that moment of personal reflection and guidance.
Thanks, Jamie. And Josh Riley, your response on personal reflection.
Yeah. Mine would definitely be Thurgood Marshall. To think about the career that he had at the time that he had it, when he was not just facing the challenges he was facing as a person of color in the legal profession in and of its own right, is remarkable. But then the fact that he also argued Brown v. Board at a time when it was not a given that separate but equal would be taken down. I would love to sit with him for some time and understand how he not only achieved what he achieved in his own right, but also achieved so much more for society. I mean, we are a much different and much better country because of his advocacy and because of his vision. And he was one of the most brilliant legal minds of our nation's history and one of the most brilliant strategists of his day. I remember in law school learning some of the stories around some of the legal strategies that went into that trial in the first instance, and being able to sit with him and have a conversation around how did you make the decisions you made there, I think would be, for me, just absolutely fascinating. The other person, I know maybe we only get one, but if I could pick a second, one of the benefits of redistricting and being in 3 different districts over the course of the last 9 months is that I've been able to go to 20 counties across upstate New York. One of my favorite things that I've done in this campaign was during Black History Month, going up to Auburn and seeing Harriet Tubman's house. And so the courage and the bravery and the conviction that she demonstrated and the leadership she demonstrated is something that's truly inspirational. And so if I could sit with her, I would love to do that too.
Thanks, Josh. We've reached the end of our questions, and we now move to closing statements. I will call on each of the candidates in reverse alphabetic order for a 2-minute statement. Osun Zotique, a closing statement.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to have this important conversation. I think that every single one of us who's listening to these words right now is doing an act of public service. You're doing it by caring. You're doing it in your time, in your talent. This campaign has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it's also been one of the most rewarding and cathartic. And so Josh and Jamie, I really admire both of you and appreciate the opportunity to run against you. And whichever one of us makes it out on the other side, I hope that we can all collaborate to do what we need to do to serve the people that live here. This land, this region of New York is so beautiful. It's the home of the Hudson River Valley School, some of the most innovative businesses, period. Also LGBTQIA+ owned businesses to ever grace this country. It's a fantastic piece of planet Earth. And I'm just so excited that we have, between the three of us, such fantastic leadership opportunity to help inspire the people of upstate New York to dream a higher dream for the possibility as a home to some of the greatest universities and places of higher learning, incredible ecological beauty. I think we can actually lead nationally if we really, really do continue on the trajectory that we're talking about shifting towards now. In seafaring, a change in 1 degree of navigation can bring you to a whole different continent. And so imagine what a change of 3 degrees or 5 degrees could do for a region after a few decades even. So it's been an utter privilege to speak with you all. And yeah, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Everybody remember that.
Josh Riley, your closing statement?
Yes, thank you all so much for being here, for doing this. I opened tonight by saying how optimistic I am about what we can accomplish together, and I really am. Look, I've seen the worst of Washington dysfunction. I've also seen the best of what we can achieve together. I mentioned earlier that I got my start as an intern, and then I was a staff assistant in Maurice Hinchey's office, and I will always be so grateful for him taking a chance on me. I had one of the least glamorous jobs in that office, but I think it was also one of the most important. I was answering the phones, I was opening the mail, I was greeting constituents. And when someone came into that office, the question was never, are you a Democrat or Republican? It was always, how can I help you? And at a time right now when our country is so divided, we don't need more professional politicians. At a time when the economy is so rigged, we don't need more Wall Street interests in our politics. We need change. We need public servants who are committed to fighting big fights, but also working together to find common ground and make a real difference in people's lives. I've mentioned a couple examples today of situations where I've been able to bring Democrats and Republicans together. I was a counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Democrats narrowly held the Senate, Republicans held the House. And even in that environment that was really divided, we were able to bring people together to get bills passed and signed into law. I mentioned one earlier tonight that helped survivors of domestic violence stay in their homes instead of being evicted. Another that helped secure funding to fight the opioid epidemic. And look, those aren't partisan issues. They're not the issues that get all the headlines. They don't go on a bumper sticker during campaign season, but they are really, really important. And at a time when you as voters have every right and every reason to be cynical about our politics, I am telling you, there's still a lot of good to be done. There's reason to be hopeful. And I'm so excited about what we're going to accomplish together. I would love to have you join our team, joshrileyforcongress.com.
Jamie Cheney, your closing statement.
Well, I leave tonight optimistic as well, and largely because I don't think that our answers on any of these questions are headed in massively different directions. I truly believe that the group on this call at this metaphorical table, we all know the change that needs to happen and we're ready to come together to do it. I also, Tompkins Committee, I want to thank you for asking your climate question in a way that really drives to the challenge in this district. The climate is incredibly important. My 3 boys are 11, 10, and 8. I remember my campaign team told me the other day they weren't going to have children because they're scared about the environment. We need really, really big change really quickly. We will not win this district and be a voice in that change if we don't acknowledge that this is a slightly Republican district and we need to bring other people to the table. You alluded to the fact that farmers want to be part of the solution and haven't felt included in the conversation. Our campaign is about including everyone in the conversation. My career history has been about creating tables and pulling together people who can build solutions together. we can build a coalition to hold this district and drive the really, really big change that we all know we need on so many fronts. We structured our campaign to make sure we're doing that from this point. I've always believed that you also don't, a good representative never says, I believe in this, this, and this. If you agree, vote for me. A good representative takes time to sit and listen and make sure that they can advocate for what the community believes. In the spirit of doing that, as I mentioned, we've spread our campaign team across NY-19 to be on the ground and sitting and listening to make sure that we can hear from this very, very purple district, those areas where we're more alike than different, and those areas where we're ready to come together and challenge difficult things like how to tackle climate as an agricultural community. I know that someone from my team is going to drop contact information in the chat. We are so happy. We drink a lot of coffee, and we're happy to sit anywhere in the district and drink that cup of coffee with you. So please reach out. We'd love to sit with each of you in person in a small group. Conversation is the heart of our campaign, and learning is as well. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
And thanks to all for a lively discussion tonight, and good campaign karma to each between now and August 23rd. In wrapping up, the Issues Committee of the Tompkins County Democratic Committee will be soliciting suggestions for future programming. We go back now to Linda Hoffman for important information where you and your friends can view tonight's program. Linda, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I'd like to put a special thank you to the candidates. This was a robust conversation. I hope these can continue as you're all on that road and traveling through the 19th Congressional District. A shout out to our Ted Crane for the superb technology support and Mike Pitrick as the timer. I also want to note at this point in time, I, in error, looked at the radio station letters, and they are to be corrected to WRFI, which will make Fred very happy. Thank you, Fred. The TCDC, as we're called, continues to be committed to offering a fair opportunity for all Democratic candidates to be heard. This is the fourth forum in the series in 2022. Tonight's forum, you can go by browsing over to the Tompkins County Democratic Committee website. If you type in T as in Thomas, C as in Charles, Democrats.org, on our homepage, you will simply look for the YouTube bright red symbol and you click on that symbol. And while there, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. But again, it is T as in Thomas, C as in Charles, Democrats.org. And again, it's very simple. Just click on the YouTube's bright red symbol. Tonight, I hope our viewers have enjoyed this conversation. We'd like to thank them for joining us this evening, and we are wishing everyone a good night. That was good, Fred.
Thanks for doing the mic.
Are we off?
We should be off.
We did it.
Ted?
Reassure us, Ted.
He's in cyberspace.